You are listening to PastThink.com audiobook. Please like and subscribe, thank you. Chapter 120. Cao Xueqin expounds the nature of passion and illusion. And Cao Xueqin concludes the dream of golden days. As soon as she heard from Ripple that Aroma had been taken seriously ill, Bao Chai hurried in with Xiao Jie and patients to see her. They found her lying unconscious on the Kong, having had what seemed to be a heart seizure. They forced some cool boiled water through her lips and eventually she came round, whereupon they settled her down to sleep and sent for the doctor. How could Aroma have been taken like this so suddenly? Asked Xiao Jie. The other evening, replied Bao Chai, she wept herself into a terrible state and had a sudden giddy spell. Mother told one of the maids to help her up from the ground, and in the end she went to sleep. There was so much else happening at the time that we never sent for a doctor. That must be what has brought this on. The doctor arrived presently, and the ladies withdrew. When he had taken Aroma's pulses, he diagnosed her condition as the consequence of undue excitement and anger, wrote out a prescription accordingly, and took his leave. Aroma had in fact overheard, or thought she had overheard, someone saying that if Bao Yu failed to return all of his maids would be dismissed. It was the shock of hearing this that had upset her and aggravated her illness. When the doctor had departed, and when Ripple went out to prepare her medicine, Aroma was left lying alone on her bed, and in her confusion she thought she could see Bao Yu standing before her. Then the dim figure of a monk appeared before her eyes, holding the pages of an album open in his hand and saying, "You are not destined to be mine. In days to come another will claim you for his own." Aroma was about to speak to him, when Ripple returned. "Your medicine's ready," she said. "You'd better take it now." Aroma opened her eyes and knew that it had all been a dream. She did not confide in Ripple, but swallowed her medicine and lay there brooding to herself. Bao Yu must have gone away with that monk. I remember that day when he tried to take the jade out and give it to the monk, he seemed bent on escaping. When I tried to stop him he wasn't his normal self, pushing and shoving me off like that. He didn't seem to care about me anymore. And ever since then, he has been so cool with Mrs. Bao, and quite indifferent towards the rest of us. I suppose you think this is enlightenment. But what sort of enlightenment is it, for you to abandon your own wife? Her ladyship asked me to serve you, but although my monthly pay has been that of a chamber wife, I have never been officially recognized as one. Now if the master and her ladyship dismiss me, and I insist on staying, out of respect to your memory, people will think me ridiculous. But how can I bear to leave, remembering how things were between us?" She agonized over her dilemma, and recalling the ominous words Bao Yu had spoken to her in her dream she vowed to herself that if her destiny could not be shared with Bao Yu she would rather not live at all. With the medicine, however, the pain in her heart gradually subsided. She felt guilty to be lying down all the time, but forced herself to rest and struggled through the next few days until she was able to get up and about again and wait on her mistress. Bao Chai herself, although she was constantly thinking of Bao Yu, and shed many a tear in private over her own unhappy fate, was kept busy helping her own mother to arrange for the payment of Xueqin's commutation fine, by no means an easy task. But of this no more. Jiaxing had arrived in Nanking with grandmother Jia's coffin, accompanied by Jia Rong, and the coffins of Qinshi, Shifeng, Daiyu and Faithful. They made arrangements for the Jia family members to be interred, and then Jia Rong took Daiyu's coffin to her own family graveyard to be buried there, while Jiaxing saw to the construction of the tombs. Then one day a letter arrived from home, in which he read of the success achieved by Bao Yu and Jia Lan in their examinations, which gave him great pleasure, and of Bao Yu's disappearance, which disturbed him greatly and made him decide to cut short his stay and hurry home. On his return journey he learned of the amnesty decreed by the emperor, and received another letter from home telling him that Jiaxi and cousin Jin had been pardoned, and their titles restored. Much cheered by this news, he pressed on towards home, traveling by day and night. On the day when his boat reached the post station at Piling, there was a sudden cold turn in the weather, and it began to snow. He moored in a quiet, lonely stretch of the canal, and sent his servants ashore to deliver a few visiting cards, and to apologize to his friends in the locality, saying that since his boat was due to set off again at any moment he would not be able to call on them in person or entertain them aboard. Only one page boy remained to wait on him, while he sat in the cabin writing a letter home, to be sent on ahead by land. When he came to write about Bao Yu, he paused for a moment and looked up. There, up on deck, standing in the very entrance to his cabin and silhouetted dimly against the snow, was the figure of a man with shaven head and bare feet, wrapped in a large cape made of crimson felt. The figure knelt down and bowed to Jiazheng, who did not recognize the features and hurried out on deck, intending to raise him up and ask him his name. The man bowed 4 times, and now stood upright, pressing his palms together in monkish greeting. Jiazheng was about to reciprocate with a respectful bow of the head, when he looked into the man's eyes, and with a sudden shock recognized him as Bao Yu. "Are you not my son?" he asked. The man was silent, and an expression that seemed to contain both joy and sorrow played on his face. Jiazheng asked again, "If you are Bao Yu, why are you dressed like this? And what brings you to this place?" Before Bao Yu could reply, 2 other men appeared on the deck, a Buddhist monk and a Taoist, and holding him between them they said, "Come, your earthly karma is complete. Tarry no longer." The 3 of them mounted the bank and strode off into the snow. Jiazheng went chasing after them along the slippery track, but although he could spy them ahead of him, somehow they always remained just out of reach. He could hear all 3 of them singing some sort of a song. On Green Sickness Peak, I dwell. In the cosmic void, I roam. Who will pass over? Who will go with me? Who will explore the supremely ineffable, vastly mysterious wilderness, to which I return? Jiazheng listened to the song and continued to follow them until they rounded the slope of a small hill and suddenly vanished from sight. He was weak and out of breath by now with the exertion of the chase, and greatly mystified by what he had seen. Looking back, he saw his page boy hurrying up behind him. "Did you see those 3 men just now?" he questioned him. "Yes, sir, I did," replied the page. "I saw you following them, so I came too. Then they disappeared and I could see no one but you." Jiazheng wanted to continue, but all he could see before him was a vast expanse of white, with not a soul anywhere. He knew there was more to this strange occurrence than he could understand, and reluctantly he turned back and began to retrace his steps. The other servants had returned to their master's boat to find the cabin empty, and were told by the boatman that Jiazheng had gone on shore in pursuit of 2 monks and a Taoist. They followed his footsteps through the snow, and when they saw him coming towards them in the distance hurried forward to meet him, and then all returned to the boat together. Jiazheng sat down to regain his breath, and told them what had happened. They sought his authority to mount a search for Bao Yu in the area, but Jiazheng dismissed the idea. "You do not understand," he said with a sigh. "This was indeed no supernatural apparition. I saw these men with my own eyes. I heard them singing, and the words of their song held a most profound and mysterious meaning. Bao Yu came into the world with his jade, and there was always something strange about it. I knew it for an ill omen. But because his grandmother doted on him so, we nurtured him and brought him up until now. That monk and that Taoist I have seen before, 3 times altogether. The first time was when they came to extol the virtues of the jade, the second was when Bao Yu was seriously ill, and the monk came and said a prayer over the jade, which seemed to cure Bao Yu at once. The third time was when he restored the jade to us after it had been lost. He was sitting in the hall 1 minute, and the next he had vanished completely. I thought it strange at the time, and could only conclude that perhaps Bao Yu was in some way blessed, and that these 2 holy men had come to protect him. But the truth of the matter must be that he himself is a being from a higher realm, who has descended into the world to experience the trials of this human life. For these past 19 years he has been doted on in vain by his poor grandmother. Now at last I understand." As he said these words, tears came to his eyes. But surely, protested one of the servants, if Mr. Bao was really a Buddhist immortal, what need was there for him to bother with passing his exams before disappearing? How can you ever hope to understand these things, replied Jiaxing with a sigh. The constellations in the heavens, the hermits in their hills, the spirits in their caves, each has a particular configuration, a unique temperament. When did you ever see Bao Yu willingly work at his books? And yet if once he applied himself, nothing was beyond his reach. His temperament was certainly unique. In an effort to restore his spirits, the servants turned the conversation to Jia Lan's success in the exams and the revival of the family fortunes. Then Jiaxing completed and sealed his letter, in which he related his encounter with Bao Yu and instructed the family not to brood over their loss too much, and dispatched one of the servants to deliver it to Ronghua House, while he himself continued his journey by boat. But of this no more. When Aunt Xue heard of the general amnesty pronounced by the emperor, she sent Xueqin to borrow money from wherever he could, to add to what she herself had collected for Xuepan's commutation fine. The Board of Justice finally gave its approval, and agreed to receive the money in settlement, whereupon an official document was issued authorizing Xuepan's release. When he was reunited with his family, there was a great deal of news for him to catch up on, some of it sad, some more cheerful. But this we can safely leave to the reader's imagination. Xuepan for his part uttered a solemn vow. If I ever behave like that again, may I be hacked to death piece by piece. Aunt Xue held her hand over his mouth. Just make your mind up to mend your ways. There's no need for all these blood-curdling oaths. But what are you going to do about Caltrip? Jean Gui died by her own hand, and though we may be poor, you can still afford to fill her place. After all Caltrip has been through on your account, I think you owe it to her to make her your proper wife. What do you think? Xuepan nodded his head in consent, while Baochai gave Aunt Xue's suggestion her full support. Caltrip herself seemed overwhelmed and flushed a deep crimson. It's the same to me if I continue to serve Mr. Pan, she said. There's no need to change things. From then on all the servants began calling her Mrs. Pan, and looked up to her with great respect. Xuepan next went to call on the Jias and offered them his thanks for all that they had done. He was accompanied by his mother and Baochai, and there was quite a family gathering at Ronghua House. Greetings were exchanged, and they were still chatting when a messenger arrived and presented the letter which Jiaxing had written on the boat. The master will be arriving in a matter of days, he reported. Lady Wang told Jia Lan to read the letter out aloud. When he reached the passage where Jiaxing described his encounter with Bao Yu, they all wept bitterly, Lady Wang, Baochai, and Aroma most bitterly of all. Then they listened as Jia Lan read out Jiaxing's words of advice, that they were not to grieve, but to understand that this was Bao Yu's destiny, that he was the reincarnation of a Buddhist immortal. If he had ever risen to become an official, and his career had then ended in disaster, it would have been much worse, they consoled themselves. That would have meant public condemnation and ruin. Better that we should at least enjoy the honor of having had a holy man in the family. After all, it was his own father's and mother's karma, their virtue, that enabled him to be born into this family. Without wishing to be disrespectful, even Sir Jing from Ningguo House who practiced yoga all those years failed to become an immortal. Bao Yu's is no mean achievement. If you think of it in this light, Auntie, referring to Lady Wang, it should be possible to have an easier mind. Do you think I hold it against Bao Yu that he has abandoned me? Sobbed Lady Wang to Aunt Xue. No, what grieves me is the thought of his wife's unhappy fate. After little more than a year of marriage, how could he be so unfeeling as to desert her like this? Aunt Xue found this quite heartrending, while Baochai had already wept herself into a faint. Since all the menfolk had adjourned to the front hall, Lady Wang continued to pour her heart out to her sister. After all the alarms and excursions I had to endure on his behalf, I finally had the comfort of seeing him marry and pass his exams, and could even look forward to the birth of a grandchild. And now this. If I'd known it would end like this, I would never have let him marry in the first place. I would never have let him bring such unhappiness on the poor girl. These things are all decreed by fate, Aunt Xue consoled her. What else could we possibly have said or done in the circumstances? We must count ourselves blessed that my daughter is with child, and that you will have a grandchild. I am sure that he at least will do well and bring some good out of all this. Look at Li Wan, her son has passed his provincial examination, and no doubt next year young Lan will go on to become a palace graduate and an official. After all that his mother has suffered, now at last she can reap her reward. As for my daughter, you know that she is not a fickle or flighty girl. You have no cause to worry on her account. Lady Wang found her sister's words convincing and reassuring. Bao Chai was always so demure and restrained as a child, she reflected to herself. Always fond of plain, simple things. Perhaps that is why she has ended up in this predicament. Perhaps everything in this world really is fated. Though Chai has wept a great deal, she has never lost her sense of dignity. In fact, she has even on occasion tried to comfort me. What a rare girl she is. So unlike her poor husband, who clearly was not meant for any joy in this world. Comforted somewhat by these thoughts, Lady Wang turned her mind to Aroma. None of the other maids presents much of a problem. The older ones can be married off, the younger ones can continue to wait on Bao Chai. But what am I to do with Aroma? She did not feel she could raise such a sensitive matter at a large family gathering, and decided to wait until the evening when she could discuss it privately with her sister. Aunt Xue did not go home that night, but stayed to comfort Bao Chai, afraid she might weep to excess. But in the end, as it turned out, Bao Chai was extremely reasonable. She reflected stoically on the whole course of events, and concluded that since Bao Yu had always been a very strange creature, and since no doubt all that had happened had been preordained, there was little point in fighting against it. She expressed this in a very level-headed way to her mother, who was most relieved to hear her adopt this attitude, and communicated it to Lady Wang when she next saw her. Lady Wang nodded and sighed. If I really were a wicked woman, fate would never have given me such a wonderful daughter-in-law. She started to become tearful again, and Aunt Xue tried to calm her down. She brought up the subject of Aroma. She has grown so terribly thin of late. All she ever does is brood about Bao Yu. It's right and proper for a wife to exhibit loyalty to her husband, even when he is a true husband to her no longer. And a chamber wife may do the same if she wishes. But Aroma was never formally declared to be Bao Yu's chamber wife, even though in fact we know that she was. Yes, I was thinking about this only a short while ago, said Lady Wang. I was waiting for a chance to talk it over with you in private. If we simply dismiss her from service, I'm afraid she won't want to go, and may even try to take her own life. We could keep her on, but I am afraid Serging would not approve. It is a tricky problem. I hardly think Serging would want her to remain single, and make a show of faithfulness to Bao Yu, said Aunt Xue. He doesn't even know that she was Bao Yu's chamber wife. He has always thought of her as just an ordinary maid, so it would seem rather absurd to him to want to keep her on. The only solution is for you to send for a member of her own family, and impress upon them the importance of arranging a decent marriage for her. We can give her a generous send-off. She is a good-natured girl, and still quite young. You should do what you can for her after all the years she has worked for you. Let me explain things carefully to her. There's no need to let her know straight away. First we should get in touch with her family, and let them arrange a match. Next we should make some inquiries ourselves, and then if it seems that the prospective husband's family are in a position to support her properly, and if the young man himself seems suitable, we can let her leave and get married. That's a very good idea. You've thought it all out very well, replied Lady Wang. If we do not take the initiative, Serging may go ahead himself and deal with her in a very tactless way, and then I will be responsible for yet another misfortune. Exactly the same thought had occurred to me, said Aunt Xue nodding her head. After they had chatted a while longer, Aunt Xue took her leave and went to Bao Chai's apartment. She found Aroma in floods of tears and did her best to console her, speaking so far as possible in vague generalities. Aroma was at heart a simple girl, and not much of a talker, and she merely gave the appropriate responses to whatever Aunt Xue said. I am only a servant, she said in the end, and it is very kind of you to think to speak to me like this, ma'am. I have never dared to go against any wish of her ladyship's. There's a good girl, said Aunt Xue, more pleased than ever with her. Bao Chai added a few high-sounding words of her own, and when she and Aunt Xue parted from Aroma their minds were considerably more at ease. A few days later Jiaxing came home, and was greeted on his arrival by all the family. Jiaxi and cousin Jin had also returned from their exile by now, and they spent some time with Jiaxing, catching up on each other's news. Then Jiaxing went in to see the womenfolk. Bao Yu's absence cast a shadow of gloom over the gathering, which Jiaxing tried to dispel as best he could. There was a reason behind all this, he said. It is up to us men now to maintain a high standard of public life, and I hope that all of you meanwhile will lend us your support here at home. There must be no hint of any slipping back into the lax old ways. Each apartment can look after its own affairs, and we've no need of a general manager. Everything in our own apartment I leave to you. This was addressed to Lady Wang, to deal with in a fitting manner. Lady Wang informed him that Bao Chai was with child, and that all Bao Yu's maids would be dismissed. Jiaxing nodded in silence. The following day he attended court to receive his instructions from the chief ministers. I am extremely grateful for His Majesty's gracious favor, he said. But since this is still within my period of mourning, I beg you to instruct me how I should express my gratitude. The ministers offered to present a memorial on his behalf. The emperor most magnanimously granted Jiaxing a special audience, and after listening to his formal expression of thanks favored him with several imperial instructions and inquired after his son, the successful provincial graduate. Jiaxing told him the full story of Bao Yu's disappearance. The emperor marveled at it and declared that Bao Yu's compositions had indeed manifested a remarkable originality, the very quality one would expect of a soul from another plane. Such a person could have excelled at court if such had been his destiny, but since he had not deigned to earn honors of a worldly nature, it was His Majesty's pleasure to confer upon him the religious title Magister Verbi Profundi, Master of the Profound Word. Jiaxing kowtowed again to express his thanks for this great honor, and took his leave. On his return home he was received by Jiao Lian and cousin Zhen, who were delighted to hear the latest news from court. Ningguo House has been set in order, said cousin Zhen, and with your consent we intend to take up residence there again. Green Bower Hermitage in the garden has been set aside for my sister Shichun's devotions. After a pause for reflection, Jiaxing gave them a long homily on their debt of gratitude to the throne for all these favors. Jiao Lian took the opportunity of raising the issue of his daughter's marriage. Both mother and father are willing that Qiaojie should be married to this Master Zhou. Jiaxing had heard the full details of Qiaojie's story the previous evening, and replied. If that is their decision, then so be it. There is nothing against a country life. What matters is that the family should be an honest one, and the lad should be prepared to study, and make his way in the world. Not every official at court is from a city family, after all. Jiao Lian replied appropriately and continued. Father is advanced in years, and is moreover afflicted with a chronic phlegmatic condition. He plans to retire for a few years and leave everything in your hands, uncle. A quiet retirement in the country would suit me well enough, commented Jiaxing. But alas, my obligations to the throne do not permit it. Jiaxing went in to see Lady Wang, while Jiao Lian sent someone to invite Granny Lu over. When she was informed that the match had been approved by the master, she proceeded to favor Lady Wang and the other ladies with a long speech on the certain future success of the young man, how his family was sure to come up in the world, and what a prosperous multitude of sons and grandsons the couple were sure to breed. While she was talking, one of the maids came in to announce that Hua Zifang, Aroma's brother, had sent his wife to convey his respects. Lady Wang spoke to the woman and ascertained from her that a match had been proposed by the Hua family to a certain Mr. Jiang living south of the city, a young man with property and land and a pawnshop business of his own. He was a few years older than Aroma, but had never married, and was exceptionally good-looking. Lady Wang was satisfied with this description of the match. Tell them I agree, she said. In a few days' time your husband can come and fetch his sister, and take her away to be married. She also sent some of her own people to make discreet inquiries, and received confirmation of the man's character, whereupon she informed Baochai, and asked Aunt Xue to break the news gently to Aroma. Poor Aroma was inconsolable at the prospect of leaving Ronghua house, but she could not offer any resistance. She remembered the visit Bao Yu had paid her at home many years previously, and the oath she had sworn afterwards, never to leave him even in death. Now her ladyship is making me do this against my will, and if I insist on remaining single and faithful to his memory, people will call me shameless. But if I do go, it is not of my own wishing. She wept until she was choking with tears. Aunt Xue and Baochai did their utmost to talk her round, and eventually she thought to herself, if I were to die here, it would be a poor return for all her ladyship's kindness to me in the past. I had best die at home. So she bade farewell to them all, her heart heavy with sorrow. It was equally painful for her to part from the other maids. Resolved to end her own life at the first opportunity, she mounted a carriage and set off for home. When she saw her brother and his wife, there were more tears, but she could not bring herself to say what was on her mind. Her brother showed her one by one all the presents sent by the Jiang family, and the trousseau that he himself had made ready for her, a part of which, he explained, had been given by Lady Wang, while a part he had provided himself. This kindness made it harder than ever for Aroma to express her sorrow, and after spending 2 days at her brother's home, she thought things over carefully again. He has done everything so nicely for me. If I were to die here, wouldn't I be hurting him? She turned it over and over in her mind, and no course of action seemed easy and right. Her heart was wound into a tight knot. She could only bear her fate stoically and bide her time. The auspicious day in the almanac arrived for her to be taken to her husband's home, and not wishing to make a scene she concealed her grief, and let herself be helped into the bridal sedan. At her new home, she thought to herself, she would make plans afresh. But once she arrived at the Jiang household, she found them so sincere and respectful towards her, deferring to her in every way as a young married lady, with the maids and serving women all calling her Mrs. Jiang the minute she set foot in the house, that death seemed impossible again. To die there would be to do them a great injury, she thought to herself. It would be a poor return for all their kindness. On her wedding night she wept without ceasing, and would not at first yield to her husband's embrace, but gradually he won her over with gentle affection. The next day, when they were unpacking her cases together, Jiang noticed among her things a crimson cummerbund. From this clue he deduced that his bride must have been one of the maids in attendance on Bao Yu, to whom he had once presented this cummerbund. Earlier he had thought that his bride was just one of Grandmother Jia's maids. He had certainly never dreamed that he was marrying Aroma. Jiang Yuhan, for it was he, Bao Yu's actor friend Bijou, was greatly moved when he remembered all the warmth shown him by Bao Yu in the past, and as a consequence he treated Aroma with still greater courtesy and consideration. He showed her the viridian sash that Bao Yu had given him in exchange for the cummerbund, and this visible proof of her husband's friendship with her erstwhile master inspired Aroma to believe that her life too lay in the hands of fate, that this marriage was indeed predestined. This in turn gave her the courage to open her heart to her husband. Jian proved himself worthy of her trust and showed her a great depth of feeling and a sincere respect, never venturing to steer her forcibly into any new direction, but showing her an ever more gentle affection and regard. Aroma was finally deprived of her last opportunity to take her own life. Gentle reader, it is indeed true, as Aroma concluded, that life is predestined and that there's naught to be done. But unfortunately this argument is too often adduced by sons and statesmen who find themselves out of favor, or by faithful widows and widowers, as an excuse for moral torpor. It was this very streak in her personality that relegated Aroma to the second supplementary register. As a poet of former times once wrote, when passing by the temple built in memory of the Lady of the Peach Blossom. Throughout the ages death has been the hardest choice. Lady, she was not alone in lamenting her weakness. Aroma's married life is the first chapter of another history. Our narrative returns to Cao Xueqin, who, having been convicted of avarice and extortion, was also released under the general amnesty, and allowed to return to his native city as a common citizen. He sent his family on ahead and himself traveled with a young page and a cartload of baggage. His journey brought him once more to Wake Ness Ferry at Rushford Hythe, and as he approached the river he saw a Taoist hermit emerging from a thatched hut by the water's edge, clasping his hands in greeting. This time Cao Xueqin recognized him at once as Zhen Xueqin and promptly bowed in response. "Esteemed Mr. Jia," began the old hermit, "I trust you have been well since we last parted?" "So you, sir, are indeed my erstwhile patron Mr. Zhen, in immortal form," exclaimed Cao Xueqin. "Why did I not know you at our last encounter? Afterwards, when I heard that your hermitage had been destroyed by fire, I was most concerned for your safety. I am fortunate indeed to have been granted this second opportunity to marvel at the profundity of your spiritual attainments. Alas, I am as benighted as ever, as you can see from my present condition." "On the previous occasion," replied Zhen Xueqin, "your position was so exalted that I dared not presume an acquaintance. Because of our old friendship, I said a few words, which you ignored altogether. Wealth and poverty, success and failure, none of these are coincidental. Nor is our meeting again like this today a coincidence, but rather a meaningful and marvelous event. We are not far from my lodge, and I would be delighted if you could stop by and pass the time of day with me." Cao Xueqin consented with pleasure, and the two men walked hand in hand, the page following them with the baggage cart to the little thatched hermitage. Xueqin ushered Cao Xueqin in, and he sat down, and was brought tea by the old man's acolyte. Cao Xueqin asked to hear the story of his mystical conversion, and Xueqin smiled. "In an instant my world was transformed. You yourself, sir, hailing as you do from the realm of luxury and opulence, must surely have heard there of a person by the name of Bao Yu." "Of course," replied Cao Xueqin. "Recently I heard a rumor to the effect that he too has taken refuge in the Dharma. I saw something of him in the past, and it certainly never occurred to me that he would take a step like this." "There is nothing unexpected about it," said Xueqin. "I have known of his strange destiny for many years. Ever since that day long ago, in fact, when I met you outside my abode in Carnal Lane, and we had that little chat. I had already encountered him then." "But the capital is a long way from your old home," said Cao Xueqin in great surprise. "How could you possibly have set eyes on him at that time?" "We had long enjoyed a spiritual communion," replied Xueqin darkly. "In that case, sir, you must know of his present whereabouts?" "Bao Yu," replied the old man, "is the stone, the precious jade. Before the two mansions of Rong and Ning were searched and their worldly goods impounded, on the very day when Bao Chai and Dai Yu were separated, the stone had already quit the world. This was in part to avoid the impending calamity, in part to permit the consummation of the union. From that moment the stone's worldly karma was complete, its substance had returned to the great unity. All that remained was for it to demonstrate some small fraction of its spiritual powers by achieving academic distinction, and by leaving behind an heir to bring honor to the family name. Thus its precious nature, its magical power, its capacity for spiritual transformation, these were made manifest, and all could know that it was no ordinary stone of this world. To this end the Buddhist Mahasattva Impervioso, and the Taoist Illuminate Mysterioso first brought it into the world, and now that its destiny is fulfilled it is they who will take it back once more to its place of origin. That is the sum of my knowledge concerning Bao Yu and, as you put it, his present whereabouts. Although Cao Xueqin could not take all of this in, he was able to follow about half. He nodded his head and sighed. "So that is the truth of the matter. And I never knew. But if Bao Yu is a person of such a remarkable spiritual pedigree, why did he first need to be blinded by human passion before he could reach enlightenment?" Xueqin smiled. "Even though I may seek to expound this, I fear you may never be able to understand it fully. The land of illusion and the paradise of truth are one and the same. Could 2 readings of the registers and a whole lifetime's experience fail to bring enlightenment? Could he fail to see the Alpha and the Omega? If the fairy flower regained its true primordial state, then surely the magic stone should do likewise? This time the hermit's words were truly beyond Yu Yuan's powers of comprehension. He knew only that they must contain some esoteric meaning, and did not venture to probe any further. "It is so kind of you to tell me all this about Bao Yu," he said. "But may I ask you another question? Why is it that of all the ladies in these noble families, none, including Her Grace the Imperial Jia concubine, has come to more than an undistinguished end?" On hearing this, Xueqin sighed. "Do not take my words amiss, sir. The fact of the matter is that all these noble ladies to whom you refer hail from the skies of passion and the seas of retribution. Since olden times their sex has been under a natural obligation to remain pure, pure from lust, pure even from the slightest taint of passion. Thus amorous beauties such as Cui Ying and Su Xiaoxiao were fallen fairies, their celestial hearts polluted with the base desires of this world, while romantic poets such as Song Yu and Sima Xiang are Yu sinned in like manner through the written word. Consider for a moment, how can any being ensnared in human attachment hope to come to more than an undistinguished end, as you put it?" As he listened to the hermit's words, Jia Yuan found himself stroking his beard meditatively and heaving a long sigh. "May I ask, sir," he ventured, "whether the Ning and Rong houses will ever rise again to their former heights of prosperity?" "It is preordained that prosperity comes with virtue and calamity with evil," replied Xueqin. "At present in these two houses the virtuous have turned to the true path, while the wicked have at least repented of their ways. In time to come, orchid and cassia will bloom, and the family fortunes will indeed prosper again. This is natural and right." Yu Yuan lowered his head in thought for a while, then suddenly laughed. "Yes. Of course. There is one among them called Lawn, Orchid, who has recently passed his examinations. As for the cassia you mention, could this be in some way connected with what you said earlier about Bao Yu achieving academic distinction and leaving behind a creditable heir? Is his posthumous son a Jiaogui, cassia, destined for glory?" Xueqin gave an inscrutable smile. "Time will show. It would be wrong to make predictions about this now." Yu Yuan had still more questions to ask, but Xueqin was clearly unwilling to provide any further replies. He told his boy to lay the table and bring in the food, and invited Yu Yuan to eat with him. When they had finished their meal, Yu Yuan was still curious, this time wanting to know the secrets of his own future, but his luck had run out. "Rest a while, sir," said Xueqin, "in my humble hermitage. I still have a duty to perform, and today is the day for its completion." This took Yu Yuan by surprise. "In view of the exalted spiritual state you have achieved, I cannot conceive what karma can remain for you to fulfill." "It concerns the love between a man and a woman." This amazed Yu Yuan even more. "Pray explain, sir." "There is something of which you are ignorant, my respected friend," replied Xueqin. "My daughter Yinglian was, as you know, kidnapped when she was a little girl. You yourself gave judgment in the case when you first held office. Now she is married to a certain Mr. Xue, and is about to give birth to his child. In so doing she will die. She will leave behind her a son to continue the Xue family's ancestral rights. Now is the moment for her earthly life to cease, and I must be at hand to receive her spirit." With a shake of his sleeve Xueqin was gone. Yu Yuan began to feel very dozy, and had soon fallen asleep in the little hermitage at Wake Ness Ferry by Rushford Hythe. Xueqin went to receive Caltrop's soul across the threshold of death, and to escort her to the land of illusion, there to be handed over to the fairy disenchantment, and to have her name entered on the register. As he passed through the great archway he saw the monk and the Taoist drifting towards him, and approaching them he said, "Mahasattva. Illuminate. My felicitations. Is the love karma fulfilled? Have all those souls involved been duly returned and entered in the registers?" "The karma is not yet complete," they replied. "But that senseless block has already returned. Now all that remains is to restore it to its place of origin, and to record the last installment of its story. Then its little trip into the world will not have been in vain." Xueqin clasped both hands together in salutation, and took his leave. The monk and the Taoist continued on their way bearing the jade, until finally they came to the foot of Green Sickness Peak, and there, in the very place where Nuwa had once smelted her fiery amalgam to repair the vault of heaven, they carefully deposited their burden, and each drifted off on his way. An otherworldly tome recounts an otherworldly tale. As man and stone become once more a single whole. One day Vanitas the Taoist passed again by Green Sickness Peak, and saw the stone that had been found unfit to repair the heavens, lying there still, with characters inscribed on it as before. He read the inscription through carefully again, and noticed that a whole new section had been appended to the gatha, with which the earlier version concluded. This new material provided several denouements and tied up various loose ends in the plot, completing the overall design of fate that underlay the original story. When I first saw this strange tale of Brother Stones, I thought it worth publishing as a novel and copied it down for that purpose. But at the time it was unfinished, the cycle within it was incomplete. There was in the earlier version none of this material relating the stone's return to the source. I wonder when this rather admirable last installment can have been added? From it the reader can indeed see that Brother Stone's experience of life sharpened the edge of his spiritual perception, and brought him to a more complete awareness of the Tao. At the end he had no cause for remorse or regret. But with the passing of the years the characters of this new version of the inscription may wear away and be misread. I had better copy it down again in this complete form and find someone in the world with leisure on his hands to publish it and transmit its message, that things are not as they seem, that the extraordinary and the ordinary, truth and fiction, are all relative to each other. Perhaps my fellow humans whom the dream of life has ensnared may find in this tale an echo, may be summoned back by it to their true home, while free spirits of the high hills may find in the record of Brother Stone's transformations, as in that older tale of the migration of the Magic Mountain, a reflected light to quicken their own aspirations. So Vanitas copied it all down, and slipping this new version into his sleeve took it off with him to the luxurious, opulent world of men, to seek out a suitable mortal for the task of publication. But all the men he encountered were either too busy establishing themselves in their careers, or else too preoccupied with their day-to-day survival, to have the leisure or inclination to prattle with a stone. Then at last Vanitas came to the little hermitage at Wake Ness Ferry by Rushford Hythe. There he found a man asleep, from which he deduced him to be a man of leisure, and thought he would give him this story of the stone to read. But however many times he called out, he could not rouse him from his slumber. Eventually he heaved him up and gave him a good shake, and the man slowly opened his eyes. He skimmed through the book and let it fall from his hands, saying, "I have seen all this myself at first hand. As far as I can see your record contains no errors. Allow me to tell you of a man who can transmit this story to the world, or your behalf, and by so doing bring this strange affair to a proper conclusion." "Whom do you mean?" asked Vanitas eagerly. "You must wait until the year ______, the _____ day of the _____ month. At the _____ hour, you must go to a certain nostalgia studio, where you will find a certain Mr. Cao Xueqin. Just tell him, Cao Xueqin says, and ask him to do such and so forth." Xueqin dozed off again, and Vanitas made a careful note of his instructions. Sure enough, after an incalculable number of generations, an infinity of eons, there was indeed a nostalgia studio, and in it a Mr. Cao Xueqin, perusing the histories of bygone days. Vanitas did as he had been instructed. He repeated Xueqin's words and handed him the story of the stone to read. This Mr. Cao smiled and said, "Rustic fiction indeed, Cao Xueqin yen. How is it that you know the man, sir? May I deduce from this that you are willing to transmit this tale for him?" "You are aptly named Vanitas," exclaimed Cao. "You have a nothing in your belly, a very vanity. These may be rustic words, but they contain no careless errors or nonsensical passages. It would be a pleasure to share this with a few like-minded friends, to help the wind down after a meal, or to while away the solitude of a rainy evening by a lamplit window. No need for some self-important being to commend it or publish it. You and your insistence on ferreting out facts are like the man who dropped his sword in the water, and thought to find it again by making a mark on the side of his boat. You are like a man playing a zither with the tuning pegs glued fast. Vanitas lifted his head and guffawed at this, dropped the manuscript to the ground, and went breezily on his way. As he went he said to himself, so it was really all utter nonsense. Author, copyist and reader were alike in the dark. Just so much ink splashed for fun, a game, a diversion. A later reader of the manuscript added a 4-line gatha, to expand a little on the author's original envoy. When grief for fiction's idle words, more real than human life appears, reflect that life itself's a dream. And do not mock the reader's tears.